I guess we're ready to get started at 6 o'clock. I just want to take a moment to welcome you all to this evening's program. It's the first one we've done on a Sunday night. We thought it would be easier with the parking out there. We're not competing with other programs at the high school, and it seems to work out quite well. We got probably one of the best crowds we've ever had. I do want to start by thanking our co-sponsors of tonight's program. John Martini. Is John here? And Mike Martini, could you stand, please? And also, I think Steve Brace is here, the owner of Century 21 Crowley Brace. Steve? We really appreciate the sponsors helping us out. It makes us, enables us to keep these programs going and not be charging folks to come. One thing we're going to be doing in the future is sending all our future notices and newsletters and so on out by email. It's become so much more expensive to, with the postage and the printing and all, that it just makes sense to do it electronically. So we need to get your email addresses, and there's a sign-up table out front on your way out. If you would please give us your email address so we can keep in contact with you. Now I'm just going to ask Kathy Lucero to say a couple of words on upcoming programs and exhibits and so on. Kathy?
Hello, everybody. Thank you again for coming. This is wonderful. It's just great to have you come out on a Sunday night. Nothing on TV anyway, except basketball. The reason I'm up here is that I'm the program director for the Society. And in April, on April 22nd, on a Sunday evening, I'm going to have a film presentation that Brian Willett and I will put together on the history of Choate Hospital. And so I would love anyone who has any old photos of Choate, or has a story or some information they would like to give me, I'd be glad to take it right up until the first or second week of April. You can leave it at the Burdett Mansion, or you can contact me at my home on Willow Street. But the second piece that I'd like to remind people on is that I am also on the committee for the Friends of the Woburn Veterans for the new War Memorial. And the list is going to be completed on this Friday, March 30th. So anyone who has a relative or a friend, a neighbor that you know was in anywhere from the World War I right up to current events, the current wars, please give your name to Larry Giuseppe. Even if you don't have their discharge papers, you can still give it to him and he can look it up online. I'm covering the wars from colonial wars right up to World War I. And we'd love to have it. It should be about 15,000 names that will be on the new War Memorial. The program that we hope to do in October is a film on the legacy of John McElhenney. And then I know, I can't wait. Thank you. Thank you. And then in November, we're going to do Woburn in the Civil War, a film on Woburn in the Civil War, which will be a fabulous piece also, because there's tremendous, tremendous history. Woburn has 3 Medal of Honor recipients in the Civil War, plus many other wonderful personal stories. So thank you very much.
I think everybody knows our guest speaker tonight. Howie Carr is a Boston radio legend, having held the mic at WRKO for more than 20 years. Today he's a member of the National Radio Hall of Fame and consistently ranked by Talkers Magazine of one of America's top radio talk show hosts. He is also an award-winning front-page columnist with the Boston Herald, known for his scathing exposés of local politicians. Uh-oh, I'm leaving. He has raised lots of eyebrows and voices over the years. Howie Carr is famous for pushing the envelope and not regretting that he went too far. He's also been a frequent guest on many television programs, the Today Show, MSNBC, C-SPAN, Larry King, Fox News Network, among others. He has also been the author of 3 books, as you well know, the Brothers Bulger, Hitman, and his latest novel, Hard Knocks. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest this evening, Howie Carr.
Thank you, Joe. It's good to be here. I'm glad there's a good turnout here. Thanks a lot for coming out on this cold, damp evening. And I'm glad to be here. And we're here to talk about Whitey Bulger, and as you know, he's As you know, Whitey is in Plymouth, Plymouth County Correctional Facility right now, and he, they have a real lid over everything at Plymouth. They don't want to lose the business that they get from the feds for holding all the federal prisoners while they're awaiting trial. But I found out a few things about Whitey. One of the things he says is that oh, by the way, that's after the show, that's the organizational chart of the Winter Hill Mob right there, and that's from Connolly's trial, and there's Whitey over there, Stevie, John Moderano, the guy that I wrote the book with, Hitman, my namesake and neighbor Howie Winter, Joe Mack, Jimmy Sims, etc. You know who they all are, but Whitey is a strange person, as we all know, and he's especially strange down in Plymouth. You know, he spent all these many years as when he was out and about being the leading gangster in Boston, talking about how tough it was at Alcatraz and all these terrible stories, and he would see people's heads chopped off and they would bounce down the floor. You know, he had a million terrible stories. Well, now he tells people, Plymouth, it's worse than Alcatraz ever was. Imagine that. And I got a letter from somebody who knows some of the guards there, and one of the guards said that he said, you know, I never liked that guy Johnny Moderano. He was a bully. I called up Moderano and told him that, and he laughed and he said, what better character reference could I have than that? And he doesn't like fat cops either. That way reminds me of my uncle who was a cop in Portland, Maine. If a guard goes by his cell, he gives him a lot of grief and says, "Who are you gonna catch as fat as you are?" And I guess that when he first came there, they were afraid he would commit suicide, and he was such a infamous prisoner that they put a guard in front of his cell 24 hours a day, so that nothing could happen to him. And the guard, I think that initially the correctional officers thought it was a pretty good assignment, because this is like a guy who's really part of history in some twisted way, and so they liked listening to him. But I guess after about like 1 or 2 shifts, he's gone through his entire repertoire. And he just keeps talking and talking and talking, like the guys Don Imus used to talk about, you'd leave Gramps at the dog track. He just keeps talking, and so they started taking the guards started taking big newspapers and books when to the assignment, and so they could put it up like that, so they would think that Whitey might decide that they didn't want to hear what he had to say, but it didn't stop him. He just kept yapping and yapping and yapping. And finally, the guards were complaining so much, and it was costing the sheriff so much, that he went to the feds, to the marshals, the U.S. Marshals, and said, "Listen, you're going to have to help me out here. You're going to have to pick up the half of the tab for this 24-hour service." And the U.S. Marshal said, "No, he's in your custody. It's up to you." And the sheriff got mad and pulled the guard, and Whitey got real lonely. He was like a little kid doing time out, and he was really whining and complaining and bitching, and they finally had to put the guard back in front of his cell. Now, I know that you heard that right before Christmas he complained that he was having chest pains, and as you probably know if you're from down there, that's that house of correction is pretty close to a hospital called Jordan. It's a regional hospital. But they were afraid that if something happened to him, they'd be hell to pay. So they get this big caravan and they send it up to Boston Medical Center, so he can get the best of treatment. And but they're afraid for some reason that he's going to be assassinated by or attacked by, or maybe there's going to be a breakout. Some of his former associates, most of whom are either 80 years old or weigh 400 pounds, are going to bust him out. So they figure they better give him an alias when he comes in. You know what his alias was? Perry Mason. So he gets there. Mr. Mason, you're going to have to take off your shirt because we're going to have to give you the EKG. And Perry goes, no way. No, you're not going to do that. I'm not taking off my shirt for nobody. And they just turned around and went back down to Plymouth. And it's great, isn't it, to think that you and I are paying for this? I mean, not just for his incarceration, which is to be assumed, but the fact that all of his lawyers, J.W. Carney, one of the better criminal defense lawyers in Boston, and now he's hired a new team of lawyers to go over the evidence so they can be ready for trial late this year or more likely early next year. And I was just talking to a guy coming through the line here with the books, and I'll be signing more books, and Marie's got all of the clothing for sale as well afterwards. But I was talking to a guy coming through the line, and he's a correctional officer, and he said that and he's got one of the old members of the gang in his prison. And he said that this guy thinks that Whitey's got 30 to 40 million stashed. Yeah, I mean that's the number I've heard too. I've heard numbers as high as 50 million, and that's one reason why it's kind of crazy. I don't understand why they didn't go harder at Catherine Gregg. They keep saying, well, we can still bring her in and force her to testify before the grand jury, and if she doesn't testify, we'll hit her with contempt charges, et cetera, et cetera. But you got to figure they found when they went into that apartment in Santa Monica $822,000 cash. They found over the course of the years they found at least 5 safe deposit boxes that he had: Montreal, Florida, Dublin, London, I think one in Italy somewhere. So if they found 5, how many do you think there are? I mean, how many? Can you imagine that? There's a Chris Nyland, the hockey player. He's married or was married to one of the daughters of one of Whitey's girlfriends, not Catherine Gregg, the older one, Teresa Stanley. And so when he was playing for the Montreal Canadiens, of course Whitey figured, well, this is a good way to stash a lot of money outside the country. So he started taking money up to Canada and let Nyland, who's a member of the Canadiens, that's like being royalty in Quebec. He let him open the account for him, and he's dumping all the money in. That's the story about the state trooper who stopped him one time at Logan Airport, and Whitey had to give the money to one of the Kevins, and the state trooper ended up getting transferred to East Overshoe from F Troop, which is the prime best assignment you can get on the state police. And so Nyland one day is he's minding his own business, and he gets the phone call from the front office, and he's been traded to the Bruins. And so normally I guess when you're traded, you just think, well, gee, I got to join my own team. How am I gonna I got to set up move everything and all this stuff. But when you control one of Whitey Bulger's safe deposit boxes, all that kind of assumes a secondary role in your life. The one thing he had to do was get Whitey's money out of the country. This was the last time he was going to have a chance. He's told me this story. I mean, this is not a secret or anything that I'm not speaking out of school. He knew that he had to get the money out, because if he didn't get it out, this time when he'd kind of be getting a pass, he would have to go through hoops, and he'd probably get caught bringing the money out. So he instead of getting all of his doing all of the usual things you do when you get traded to another team, he ran immediately to the bank and with a duffel bag and grabs all the money and throws it into the duffel bag. And then he's going through the airport, and all these people are coming up to him, and again, like I said, you know the way the Canadians are in Montreal. They're all going, Chris, we love you. You know, it's terrible to leave you. And they're trying to hug him and everything, and he's just trying to keep his hands on the bag, you know, because somebody runs off with that bag, he's in big trouble. Whitey was just an amazingly devious character. One of the stories that I like to tell, I got it late in the writing of Hitman. Stevie Flemmi, his partner, when he cut his plea deal, he has to. All career criminals have to make an account of their entire career in crime. You know, just have to spell out everything. And Stevie Flemmi's runs more than 100 pages, single-spaced. It's pretty amazing all the stuff that went on. But there's some really interesting stories in there about Whitey and some of the scams that he ran when he was in the rackets in Boston. Does anyone remember the Blackfriars? Yeah. That was this bar on Summer Street back in Boston back in the 1970s. And it was owned by this guy who was like, I guess he was also a coke dealer, and they handled a lot of cash, and they were also into backgammon. And so every night after last call, they'd be snorting coke, and they had a lot of coke around, you know, tens of thousands of dollars in cash. And so one night, everybody knew this. So one night after last call, two guys go into the place. And there are 5 people in the bar, including the owner of the bar, and a former reporter from Channel 7 named Jack Kelly, and Kelly, and so they go in there and they grab everything. They grab the money, the drugs, and then they shoot everybody in the back of the head. I mean, just a really gruesome crime. Whitey had nothing to do with it, though. Believe it or not, he didn't. But the next morning he wakes up. And he, you know, reads the paper or hears it on the radio, and he's you know, the first thought in his mind is, how am I going to make some money off this? You know, there's got to be a way for me to make money off this. You know, he's in a way was kind of like his brother. You know, he didn't really. He wanted to extract the tax on every transaction that took place in the Commonwealth. You know, he didn't produce any goods or services or anything, but he just thought that he ought to get a cut of everything that went down. So he's thinking, how the hell am I going to get some money out of this deal? What am I going to do? And he thinks, and then he remembers that the owner of the bar was owed $60,000 by this kind of shady businessman. I'll call him Teddy. And so Whitey says, okay, I know how I'm going to get the money. So he calls Zip Connolly. Everybody knows who Zip Connolly is, right? The crooked FBI agent now doing life in prison in Florida. And he calls up Zip Connolly and says, Zip, can you get me the Boston police photos, the crime scene photos from the Blackfriars? And Zip, I guess, was kind of perplexed a little bit. But, you know, you don't ask your boss, you know, why he needs something, right? You just do it. And so Zip gets him the photographs. That afternoon, Whitey walks into Teddy's business and his office with a manila envelope under his arm, and says, "Hey Teddy, I'm Jimmy Bleepin' Bulger, and you owe me 60 grand." And this guy Teddy goes, "What? I've never met you. How could I owe you money?" And he said, you owed the owner of the Blackfriars 60 grand, and I killed him last night, and now you owe the money to me. And Teddy says, "What? Are you insane? You know, every cop in the state is looking for the people who killed those 5 guys, and I never met you, and you're telling me that you killed the guy. You're confessing to me that you killed him, and you want some money?" And Whitey said, "Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing." He said, "Let me tell you something, how much I have this town wrapped around my finger. I not only could go into that bar and kill those 5 guys with impunity and steal all the drugs and the money, but I own the cops in this town so much that I could stick around and take photographs of the scene and he takes out the Boston police photos and puts them down on the guy's desk. And I guess I don't have to tell you the rest of the story. He walked out the door with the 60 grand. He, there was a story that broke in the papers a couple of weeks ago. There's the odd thing is this guy's 82 years old now, and he's been in prison. He's been in jail for the last close to a year now, and all the time there are new stories about him. And this latest story was that maybe he was involved in the murder of this poor woman out on the Cape Cod National Seashore. They found her body, and they found parts of her body, and her hands had been chopped off to prevent identification. And there was a lot of speculation that maybe Whitey was involved in this because he spent a lot of time down in Provincetown. As a matter of fact, Zip Connolly sometimes used to put in his reports, Whitey couldn't have been involved in the murder of fill in the blank because he was in Provincetown with a woman. He'd always put with a woman. I'll let you make your own decision after you see the Gay Whitey magnet. Feel free to take one or two home with you tonight. But they got into the habit of when they were burying the bodies. They figured that it was always better to have this mystery about what happened to the body. So they wanted they wanted the bodies to disappear to do the Houdinis, and they would bury them. And just to make sure, they got into both chopping off the fingertips. Later on, they didn't chop off the hands; they chopped off the fingertips, and they pulled the teeth. They extracted the teeth so you couldn't get the dental records. And this was a story that I was told by Johnny Moderata when I was working on Hitman. It was told to him by Stevie Flemmi. Flemmi was the guy that was in charge of extracting the teeth. He used he had rusty pliers that he used, and it was always a mess. And I give the story away by what I'm about to say next. Catherine Gregg, what was her job? Remember Catherine? What was her job before she went on the lam? Dental hygienist. Dental, keyword dental hygienist. So I guess one year Christmas was coming up, and Christmas is for cops and kids, Whitey's famous line, but it's also for gangsters too. And so he wanted to get Stevie a present, and for Christmas. So he went to Catherine and he said, Catherine, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go get your doctor's catalog from the dental supply company, and I want you to order the best, most state-of-the-art, most expensive pair of teeth extractors that there is in the book. And that's what they gave to Stevie Flemmi for his birthday. I mean, for Christmas. I mean, this is how these guys were really. I mean, they were quite. I mean, they weren't just gangsters. I mean, they were serial killers. And Catherine Gregg, for instance, is another strange one. She was she was one of the two twins. They were very good-looking girls at South Boston High, and she had a younger brother named David Gregg. And David Gregg was I guess he was into pills, and for some reason Whitey liked him a lot. And again, we're coming back to the Gay Whitey Provincetown thing again. And Whitey would always have him around, and Whitey actually wanted to bring him into the gang. And but the guy was always like the guy was always nodding off, And Whitey was in many ways smart, but he wasn't a drug guy. So so this guy David Gregg would just nod off, and Whitey would say to the other guys in the gang, "What's wrong with David? I don't think he's getting enough vitamins." And of course they wanted to tell him, "Jimmy, he's getting too many vitamins. That's the problem." But eventually David Gregg quote unquote committed suicide down on the Cape, and there was supposedly the gun was found a few feet further than would have been possible or normally possible. So there's always been speculation that Whitey did away with him. And Catherine Gregg was married to this Boston firefighter who later died of a drug overdose, and named McGonigal. And he was he too had two twin siblings, twin brothers, and Whitey murdered both of her brothers-in-law, both of them. The first one, there was a gang war going on in Southie back in the 60s. They were identical twins, and Whitey said, Whitey just saw this guy driving, the minor member, the guy who was just kind of a hanger-on. He saw him, and he said, he saw him driving his brother's car, so he just pulled out a gun and shot him. And later on, people said, "Why'd you kill that kid, Whitey? He really wasn't a threat to anybody." And Whitey said, "They're identical twins. How was I supposed to know? You know, if it had been a fraternal twin, I wouldn't have shot him. But it's not my fault. You can't blame me." And then he got the other brother was Paul McGonigal. You know, I mean, I assume once you kill somebody's relative or even a friend, you got to keep an eye on that person, right? But when you kill a twin brother, it's really something. So he knew he had to get rid of Paul McGonigal, the other twin. So again, this is Whitey at his most devious. So Whitey goes to the bank, and he gets brand new $20 bills. You know the kind. You know the way. You know when you gotta you gotta make sure that they're not sticking together. You know those kind of 20, fresh from the mint. And he runs into McGonigal and he says, "Hey, Paulie, look at these $20 bills I got. Have you ever seen anything like this?" And Paul McGonigal looks at it. "Hey, Whitey, these look real to me." Again, you got to remember, most of these guys are not the sharpest knives in the drawer. And so Whitey says to Paulie, "I've got a lot of this money, I'll sell it to you 50 cents on the dollar. I'll meet you at down behind the Sunoco station at midnight tonight. Just bring some money, and I'll have some of these new queers, I guess that's what they call them, queer bills." And so Paul McGonigal comes in, and he gets into the back seat of the car, and Whitey hands him the valet's or valise or whatever you call it, the little satchel, and he opens it up, and then Whitey pulls out the gun and shoots him. So that's two twins, two brothers-in-law of Catherine Gregg, and she's still living with this guy for 16 years. I don't know. It's hard to. I know that they're probably claiming now it's the Stockholm syndrome and that sort of thing, but the gangland etiquette back in those days is also sort of a strange thing. There was a guy named Billy O'Sullivan, and he was a friend of Johnny Moderano's. And he was a gangster, and he started this after hours club, and in Dorchester. And so he invited Johnny Moderano to the opening night of the club, and he spent a lot of money fixing the place up and getting it all straightened out and getting it all fixed up. And so the first night was there, and the place was packed, and they were making a lot of money, and it was obviously going to be a big success, and Billy O was really happy about it. And so then this guy came up and a guy named Tony Varenas came up and started giving Johnny Moderano some grief. And Johnny was a little taller than him, so he just pulled out his gun to Tony Varenas and shot him through the head. And of course, like in 2 seconds, the place was empty. And that was Billy O knew that was the end of his. That's not the kind of word of mouth you want. The opening night of your after hours club, right? So the way things work is Johnny owed Billy O because he'd wrecked his club, right? But anyway, Billy O gets killed in this gang war in South Boston that Whitey's involved in. He and Whitey are on the same team, and Billy O gets killed. And about a year after Billy O gets killed, Johnny Moderano is in his bar on Columbus Avenue, just sitting there, and this guy walks in, and he's dressed up in a suit, like a politician, dressed like a politician. He's got very very light hair, blue eyes, and of course it's Whitey Bulger. And Whitey says, Johnny, I'm Whitey Bulger, and Billy O always told me if I had a problem, I should come to you. In other words, he was cashing in the favor, and that's the way it worked. And he wanted Whitey to set he wanted Johnny Moderato to have Howie Winter, who's the head of the Winter Hill gang, broker a truce between these two gangs. And you could call in a chit like 20 years later. Like, for instance, when Buddy McLean, who was the original head of the Winter Hill gang, he had the FBI agent H. Paul Rico set up a guy for him one time who was trying to kill him. The FBI agent set up the hit. And so many years later, Buddy McLean had been dead for 20 years, and H. Paul Rico, the FBI agent, remember this, the FBI agent needed a driver, a wheelman on a hit in Tulsa, Oklahoma, of the guy who owned this highlight company. This is all in the Brothers Bulger and Hitman, and he went to Joe McDonald and said, Joe was Buddy McLean's partner, and said, Joe, I want you to be the wheelman. And Joe just said, sure, because he owed him. That's the way they operated. Whitey was I'm sure you've heard the stories that Whitey had a knife in his boot, right? That's an old story. That's an old story. And Johnny used to say that they always, and Whitey would always say, I have to wear these boots every day because I have this knife. That's why I wear the boots. Because boots aren't that comfortable when you get right down to it, are they? And so Johnny said they finally figured it out, that the boots were not so much about the knife. The knife was an excuse. If you have a boot, what can you put in the bottom of the boot? Lifts. So Whitey was trying to add 3 inches to his height. He didn't want to be the corrupt midget number 2. He also used to tell these guys that he would when he was a kid, he would go to these Jimmy Cagney movies, and this was in the 30s and I guess the early 40s in South Boston, and he would always try to mimic what Jimmy Cagney, the way he spoke, and his mannerisms and that swagger that he had. And Johnny always said that whenever he would say something like this, they would all kind of look at each other, because Whitey did indeed remind them of a gangster in the movies, but it wasn't Jimmy Cagney. It was Richard Widmark, and I think it's The Kiss of Death. Tommy Udo, when he pushes the old lady down the stairs, he was a he and Flemmy were they also had this phobia about germs. They as time went on, they became more and more obsessed about hygiene. So they were weird guys, and nobody really liked having them around. They were, in some ways they were valuable to have around, but in other ways not so much. They were just kind of stick in the muds. So the guys learned that there was one way that they could always get rid of these guys, and that was if all you'd have to do would be to go, yeah, so Whitey, I would say, and then some other guy would say, yeah, you got a cold too? I think I'm picking one up. And you just do it 2 or 3 times, and they'd be gone. They were gone. They wouldn't stick around. They all grew up in the '60s during the Irish gang wars. I'm sure you've heard of that. That's it started out with the Somerville guys, the Winter Hill, Buddy McLean versus the Charlestown guys, the McLaughlins, and they all got into this war, and the war sort of became it just got out of hand. Everybody was involved in it and taking care of business. There's another story that Stevie Fleming tells. There was this the McLaughlins. They were these they were just longshoremen types from the docks and of Charlestown, and they were with the Hughes family, the Hughes brothers, and the feds, the FBI put a gypsy wire on. That means an illegal wiretap. Those were the days they could do things like that. They wouldn't bother with getting a search warrant or anything like that. They just get these illegal wiretaps. And of course, even back then, even before Clint Eastwood made the movies and all the stories about J. Edgar Hoover, there were a lot of stories even then about J. Edgar Hoover and Clyde Tolson being gay. And so one day they were listening to the McLaughlins talking, and they said there was a picture of Paul Rico. Again, this guy Paul Rico, he keeps coming back. He's not very well known, but he was like really one of the most evil people in this whole group. The FBI agent, he's listening in. They got a picture of him in the old Record American, and he's going down to Washington and he's got a picture of him with Clyde Tolson and J. Edgar Hoover, and he's getting some big award. And you can imagine how the McLaughlins were, how they were laughing about that. And so they got Punchy or George or one of the McLaughlins say, "Yeah, look at that Rico. He's a bleepity bleep bleep bleep." And yeah, what they're doing each other, et cetera, and you know what they were saying. So Rico got really mad at that point because someone had called him a a Barney Frank. Okay, I don't want to be accused of hate speech here, So he says, "I'm going to get those guys. I'm going to kill those McLaughlins. I'm going to make sure that I can kill them." So a few weeks later, Georgie McLaughlin was on the FBI most wanted list. He would get drunk and kill people, and he'd kill this bank teller at a baby's christening, believe it or not. I mean, he just got drunk, and the guy was a bank teller, and he just shot him in between the eyes for no reason. And so he was on the lam, and they found out where he was, and they were going to go in and get him, and they were going to kill him, and so. So Rico, Paul Rico, went to Stevie Fleming, Whitey's future partner, and said, "I need a throwdown." And Stevie said, "You're an FBI agent and you need a throwdown? I mean, that's kind of weird, because even guys like Fleming, I think, at that point in the early '60s, thought the FBI was on the level, right?" So he says, "What do you need a throwdown for?" And he said, we know where George McLaughlin is. There's 5 of us going to go in and into the apartment, and we're just going to shoot him in cold blood. But we need a throwdown so that we can justify it by saying he was waving the gun around on us. And so a couple days later, Stevie picks up the paper, and they've arrested rather than shot George McLaughlin. And so Rico comes around to the store, and it says, and Stevie says, "What happened? I thought you were going to kill McLaughlin." And he said, Rico said, "Yeah, we had 4 guys in on the deal, but we couldn't trust the 5th one, so we had to take him alive." And have you guys ever heard of Alcee Hastings, the congressman from Florida? He was the first black federal judge in Florida, maybe in the whole of the Deep South, but he was really crooked, and he was selling lenient sentences in his courtroom, and they needed to take him down, and they wanted to get this was after Rico was retired and was working at the Highlight at World Highlight. And they wanted to set him up in a sting because Santo Trafficante from Tampa was coming up for sentencing, and so the FBI said, "We need a guy to go undercover and pretend to be a gangster. Who can we get?" Didn't take them long to come up with the name H. Paul Rico. They said, "This is the guy who can really portray a gangster." Of course, it was pretty easy for him to portray a gangster because, in fact, that's what he was a gangster. in Boston. So they sent H. Paul Rico down to pretend that he was to masquerade as a gangster, and he got Alcee Hastings' bagman on tape, taking this huge payoff, and they eventually impeached and convicted Alcee Hastings. And I guess I can tell you the rest of that story. He was then immediately elected to Congress by his by his grateful constituents. And when the Democrats took over the Congress back in 2007, he was due to become head of the intelligence agency, the House Intelligence Agency, and even Nancy Pelosi had to draw a line in the sand and say, I'm sorry, Alcee, you're just not getting this job. You know, that's just not going to happen. But H. Paul Rico got a commendation from the U.S. Senate for being such a great concerned citizen, and he did, and he died in prison. He was taken, he was arrested, and for the murder of the High-Lie executive in Tulsa, and he was taken back to prison, and that's where he died. I never, you know, I know a lot of us grew up around here, and this is an older crowd, but I had no idea that things like this, it was this bad when I was a kid, you know. I mean, I'd read, every couple of days there'd be a story in the Record American, you know, there'd be some body sprawled over somewhere or something like that, but I had no idea it was like that. They had this guy, there's a guy, Jimmy Fleming. He was Stevie's older brother, and he was another crazy guy, and he was a friend of Johnny Moderano's as well. And he had a serious drug and alcohol problem, and he would just kill people, you know, just out in the open. He didn't care. He didn't care where he was. And Johnny told me a story one day. He had this crush on this waitress, this bartender, this female bartender down in somewhere in Park Square, and they were sitting. Johnny and Jimmy Fleming were sitting at a bar, and there were two black guys sitting next to them, and the black guy just said, "Excuse me, ma'am, can you get me another drink?" I mean, very polite and all this, not messing around. And somehow Jimmy was so stoned that he thought that he had insulted his would-be girlfriend, and he goes, "Hey Johnny, you got a knife?" And Johnny goes, "Yeah, I got a knife." And so he gives him the knife, and Jimmy just takes the knife and just stabs it into the guy's thigh, and you know, just for absolutely no reason. Didn't kill him, but the guy ran off because he knew he would be killed if he was going to stick around. Another time, this guy Jimmy Fleming. This is a Frank Salemi story. Jimmy Fleming was in this in this car with this ex-con that he knew from MCI Norfolk, and he got somehow got in a beef with him, and it was on Tremont Street in the South End, and he just shot him, just pulled out his gun and shot him. And this was dusk, I guess, in the summer months, probably like around 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. And so he shoots him, and you know, the window explodes on in the car, and the car shakes a little bit, and then Jimmy Fleming just gets out of the car and kind of like, you know, staggers away towards the nearest bar. There's two guys across the street who watch it, uniformed Boston cops. Now, what do you think the uniformed Boston cops would do under those conditions? They've just witnessed a murder by one of the most notorious hitmen in the city of Boston. What would they do? Looking the other way, that's not a bad suggestion, but if you look the other way, there's no money to be made. So instead, what they did was they went down to Stevie's store, which was nearby in Roxbury, and they said, "Stevie, you know, we're just coming here as your friends. You know, it's lucky you have friends like us, but the bear just killed somebody in the car." And so Stevie gave each of them $1,000, and back in those, they have the line. There's districts and abutting police districts in Boston. District 4 is the Back Bay, and District 2 is Roxbury. And this was right on the District 2, District 4 line. And so they went. So after they got paid the $1,000, the body's still lying there in the car. So the cops went back to District 4 and put the car in gear, and then proceeded to push it into District 2. Because see, this is the way you always want to do it. It's always good. You know, Moderano told me this. This is like when they killed Varanus. They wanted to. They killed him in Suffolk County, and they dumped his body in Norfolk County. It's always good if you can. If you can't make the body just totally disappear, it's better to have the body found in a different county or a different jurisdiction, different town or city anyway, than where the murder actually took place. Because then there'll be some kind of jurisdictional dispute, and in an organized crime type case where it's going to be hard to get a conviction in the first place, nobody wants to handle it. So you're always trying to move the bodies around. Another thing I learned about, as you may know, I was threatened by these guys. I used to work at Channel 56, which was right next to the Globe. And when I was working at the Herald, and I had the 2 jobs, and so to get from the Herald to Channel 56, I had to go right by the liquor store that Whitey sold, and the stole. Like, did I say sold? What's wrong with me? Stole, it was like a political standout. You know, he and Stevie would be out there, because you couldn't put a tap or a bug on any of the light poles or anything, because there was too much noise in the rotary. So the cars would be coming around, they'd be going, that kind of stuff. But they never did that with me. They would always give me the dirty, or especially Whitey. Stevie didn't care, but Whitey would always just look at me like this. Because it was not about him so much, it was about his brother, And so his brother, so anyway, one night, Jack Hines, the anchor of the Channel 56 News, you remember him, he worked at Channel 5, his father was the mayor, John B. Hines, and he went into the bar, he went into the liquor store to pick up a bottle of wine. He lived in South Boston at the time, and the guy who was behind the counter said, "Hey Jack, how come Howie never comes in here?" And Jack said, I don't know, He knew I didn't go in there. And the guy said, "Well, you tell Howie if he ever comes in here, we got a fresh dumpster out back waiting for him. It'll be another Robin Benedict, the prostitute that was chopped up by the professor." And after that's when I started trying to. I started taking a different way home every night, Because they always say that a creature, the people who get hit are creatures of habit. You don't want to, if they want to get you, they're probably going to get you, but you don't want to make it easy for them by just doing the same thing every night. And then when I was writing my book, Kevin Weeks had been telling this story for years. Whitey had been gone for maybe 10 years at this point, but Weeks would tell everybody that he knew where I lived, and I lived in Acton at the time. And he knew that I lived across the street from a cemetery, and that they had planned. He and Whitey had planned to take rifles out into the cemetery, and they were going to shoot me. And when I came out in the morning, and Weeks actually claimed that they had me. Weeks had me in his sights, but I had my daughter by my hand, so he didn't want to. He didn't want to go. He didn't want to shoot me in front of my daughter. I mean, it was like a B movie, you've seen that from the Manchurian Candidate on, they switched the gun around. I never believed it very much because his brother, Weeks' brother, was a selectman in Acton, and he lived right around the corner from me. So naturally he would know where I lived. They didn't have to do any research. But so when Weeks wrote his book, I got a call from 60 Minutes. We have to talk to you. We have to tell you some very disturbing news for 60 Minutes. So I went over there to the hotel they were set up in, and they told me that again. And I said, "This isn't about the cemetery, is it?" And they looked very disappointed. And I said, my book had just come out, and I said, "Look, it's right in my book too." And so then they tell me, "Yeah, but this isn't just bragging. They were actually in the leaves. They were going to whack you right there." And so I listened to it, and I came up with a line they really liked, which was I said, Kevin Weeks didn't have the stones. And once I said that, I knew the interview was over. They had what they needed. That was the line they wanted. So but as I'm driving back to the radio station that afternoon, I'm thinking there's something wrong with this story. There's just something that doesn't add up. There's a problem with this story, with the cemetery. And then when I got back to the radio station, I remembered what the problem is. This cemetery that I lived across the street from was an old colonial cemetery. There were people from Lexington and Concord, the battles that were buried there. And there's a huge stone wall about this high on the border, right across the street from my house. And I'm thinking to myself, if Weeks and Whitey are lying in the grass with rifles, they've got a direct shot at that stone wall. That's all. I know Whitey. I know Whitey was a master and a genius of things, but I don't think he had a gun that shot up like this and then went out like this. So I called up the producer and I said, before you run with this story, I'd really suggest you go out to the graveyard, go back to the graveyard, and just get down on your stomach and look at the front door of the house where I used to live, and just tell me if you have an open shot or how far back you have to go to get the open shot. We used to have a saying at the Herald, the old Herald American, when it was owned by Hearst, there are some stories that are too good to check. And I think this was one of those stories that was too good to check. So they ran with it anyway. But Whitey had this. It was amazing the power that he had. There was a guy told me recently at a book signing that he had said something about Billy. He had spoken ill of Billy, and he was from South Boston, and a couple of days he had an unlisted number because he was involved in some local community events and had some problems. And a couple of days after he said this to one of Billy's lackeys, that spoken ill of Billy's lackeys, he gets this call. Hi, it's Jimmy Bulger. I just want to let you know I think you're right about my brother. He did take credit for something he didn't do. And this guy thought to himself, why is Whitey Bulger calling me and telling me this? But then he realized Whitey wanted him to know that he could get his unlisted phone number, just like that. There was one of my fellow Herald reporters back in the days when Hearst owned the paper was a guy named Paul Corsetti. He's dead now. He was a pretty tough guy. He was in Vietnam. He was a truck driver. He was from Medford. He knew a lot of the guys, a lot of the wise guys, and he was working on this story, and about a hit in South Boston, a guy named Louis Lidoff that was hit by Whitey, and so he was working on the story and trying to put something together. And one night he gets a call, and this guy says, I got some information on that Louis Lidoff hit, and sort of gives him some tantalizing details that he wouldn't have known unless he was pretty well connected. And so Paul decides to go down to meet him at this bar in Quincy Market. And the guy didn't give his name, obviously, because that's not just something you don't do. So Paul is there, and he's just nursing a drink and just waiting for somebody to show up. And this guy comes up to him and sits down next to him at the bar and says, "Say, aren't you Paul Corsetti?" Because he'd been on TV and something recently. He says, "Say, aren't you Paul Corsetti? I saw you on TV." And Paul says, yeah, I am. Nice to meet you, but I don't mean to be rude, but I'm waiting for somebody. And the guy goes, "You're waiting for me, pal. I'm Jimmy bleeping Bulger." He says, I've got some information for you here. He says, and he pulls a piece of paper out of his pocket, and he says, here's what kind of car you drive. Here's the license number. Here's your wife's car, the license number. Here's the address where you live. Oh, and here's the daycare center where you drop your daughter off every morning. And then he just walks out the door. And The next morning, Paul shows up at the city room wearing a gun, you know, and there weren't any stories written about Whitey for years after that, either by the Globe or by the Herald. I mean, they were just, you know, Paul went to the Boston police, and they said they had him for more than 40 murders. More than 40 murders, and that they said they couldn't. He finally went to Larry Zannino, and Larry Zannino had you know, kind of intervened, and you know, Jerry Angiulo's top muscle, and he convinced Whitey that he wasn't. Whitey was more concerned that his brother was somehow going to be named in the story than him. But he had. You know, the thing is, when they threatened you like that, you really couldn't, you know, even then you knew that Zip Connolly was bad, right? I mean, so I couldn't, you know, when they threatened me or Paul Corsetti or they threatened Kevin Cullen at the Globe, the way they did it with Kevin Cullen at the Globe was they sent an FBI guy directly to threaten him. Cullen was working on this series about Whitey. And the FBI agent, who later got some of his relatives hired at the State House on the state payroll, the FBI agent said, you know, Tony Shula, he was a guy in the witness protection program. He was one of these guys. He's up here on the chart. He was the guy who fixed races. He said, you know, Tony Shula says that Whitey's planning to kill you if those stories run. Well, the guy's in the witness protection program. You know, how's Kevin Cullen supposed to check it out? He can't check it out, right? So but you know, if they own the FBI, they threaten the state police. If you're in the state police and you make a move, you know, they either transfer you like they did with the state trooper who was at Logan Airport, or with Jack O'Donovan, the lieutenant colonel who died last week, and I wrote a column about him. They put in an anonymous rider in the state budget to force him to retire. So the state police are hobbled, and then you have the Boston police who are also kind of dicey. And you know this. We didn't know this until the congressional hearings, but when Ray Flynn was elected mayor of Boston in 1983, Billy Bulger went to him and said, I'll do anything I can to help you, Ray. You know, you're from Southie, I'm from Southie. You know, you need special legislation, you need local aid. I'll do anything I can for you. There's only one favor I ask in return, only one small favor that I ask in return. You know what the favor was? He wanted Zip Connolly to be promoted, to be made police commissioner of the city of Boston. Can you imagine that? I mean, there would have been like, this isn't the guy who would have been control. This is a gangster. This is a guy who is a gangster. Who's now doing 40 years for a gangland hit. Would have been the police commissioner of Boston. Johnny Powers, the former Senate president, used to say, this would be like if in Illinois, Al Capone's brother was president of the state Senate. I think that was a good way to put it. But, you know, Joe, should I take some questions, or what? Yeah, we should take some questions. Yeah, come on up. Don't be shy.
And in that Hitman, and in the book you made reference to the fact that Billy Bulger had a stable of drug dealers, and according to the Globe, he never dealt in drugs, you know, in a certain era of the Globe, anyway. And he managed to procure state jobs for his drug dealers.
Yeah.
And these were no-show jobs where you worked very little and showed up for your pay, if you worked at all. And how did he manage to do that is my question. Who got him the jobs? And when they got him the jobs, how come they kept them?
Well, actually, these were Whitey Bulger's drug dealers. In 1990, you know, when everything was falling apart and Weld was running against Silber, they finally busted. There were 4 separate rings of drug dealers in South Boston. And they brought them all in, and I still remember it. There were like 50 of them that were brought into federal court that day. It was a Friday in the summer, And there were so many of them that there were 4 of us reporters. There were 2 Herald and 2 Globe. And we just had to kind of like, pool our resources because there weren't enough of us to handle all the arraignments. And by like noon, we realized that all of these guys had jobs at the T or at the MWRA, or some of them. There was one we never got to play the actual tapes, but because it never came out in discovery. But the feds recorded some people talking about how much drug dealers talking about how much it was going to cost them to get the jobs and which politicians they should go to, and they practically had rate cards for these jobs. If you wanted to be a bus driver, I mean that's kind of a rotten job being a bus driver, right? But if you wanted to work in the power plant in South Boston, then that costed you like twice as much money. And well, how did they get the jobs? I mean, what did Finneran call the MBTA? Mr. Bulger's Transportation Authority, And the MWRA, the Mass Water Resources Authority, the head, oh, thank you. My throat is getting dry. Thank you, Joe. The MWRA, the personnel director was the wife of a state senator from Framingham. Some of these guys had 2 no-show jobs. And they caught one guy. They arrested one guy sleeping at a public works yard. He was a drug dealer. I don't think there was more than 2 or 3 of them out of the 50 that didn't have hack jobs. We called it I forget what we call it. It was astounding how many. I mean, even I was amazed by it. And then and of course a lot of them were out on disability. It's tough lugging all that, cocaine around the city, it's really strain your back. Yes?
I was wondering if you could comment on the status of organized crime in Boston today, either Irish or Italian or other groups.
Yeah, I don't think I think most of organized crime per se is no longer in existence. It's just drug dealers. There's I mean, there've been various changes. With credit cards, loan sharking isn't what it used to be. I mean, the last loan shark that was arrested was a member of the Mass State Police. I guess you remember that guy. And as for the numbers, I mean, the state treasurer is the biggest bookie in the state, as Billy Bulger always used to say, and the drugs are kind of wide open. I would guess that the biggest the problem, one of the amazing things though is that there's a guy named Mark Rossetti, and I don't know if you've been following this. It's been getting a little play in the newspapers, but not that much. He was like the biggest mafia guy left in East Boston. He had I guess he's a junkie basically, and the feds recruited him as an informant, even though he was the top guy. I mean, they repeated the same mistake that they made with Whitey Bulger, recruiting the top guy, and they even bought him his cell phone. And when they finally arrested him and put up that organizational chart like these two for his group, the first 2 rungs of the hierarchy were Italian, and beyond that it was all Hispanic. There's not much left. There's a few. I mean, there's a few people around taking bets, things like that. But if you look at the when they make the traditional pre-Super Bowl bust, they bust like 15, 20 people. They're all like in their 60s and 70s. There's nothing much left. It's not like the old days. You see somebody under the age of 50 in organized crime is the kid. Yeah. Yes, sir. Punchy. Yeah, I think he was gunned down by, according to Stevie Flynn. Well, Barboza said he did it, but he lied. The guys who really did it were Frank Salemi and Stevie Fleming. They did it. Punchy McLaughlin. This guy Punchy McLaughlin, I mean, talk about a hard luck hood. He was a bad guy. He's the one that the FBI wanted to kill. He and his brother. His brother's still alive, by the way, still doing life somewhere. But Punchy, they kept shooting Punchy. One time he was waiting in Brookline in a car, and these two guys came up to him and just started shooting, and they missed. Another time he was in the parking garage at Beth Israel, and these two guys dressed as Hasidic rabbis came up to him and started shooting at him, and they shot his hand off. And then another time he was driving down in Canton, and they ambushed him for Stevie shot him from a tree. And no, he was in a tree, really, and they shot him. You know, this was when Canton was more rural than it is. And anyway, he lost his arm, and his hand, and he was going to his brother's trial every day, when his brother was on trial for killing that bank teller while he was drunk, and so he would carry the gun in a little lunch bag, you know, but again, I repeat, he only had one hand. So these guys come after him, and he was at a tremendous disadvantage because his gun was in the bag, and so I guess they shot him like 15, 20 times, and he just goes like this, and he hands the bag to this woman, some housewife. This is down at the bus station in West Roxbury. He hands the gun to the woman, and she's so scared she runs home. And then she opens the bag and sees the gun and screams and faints. And supposedly another part of that story is that there was actually one kid. There were a million witnesses, and there was this one kid. He was a teenager, and he knew he'd seen it, and he could identify Flemmy and Salemi, and he was going to testify. So I guess what happened, and again, this is according to Flemmy, they went to Buddy McLean, who was the head of the Winter Hill gang, and they'd basically done it for him. So they said, you better straighten it out with this kid. So Buddy McLean called the kid's father and just said, we'll kill all of you. If this guy testifies, we'll kill the whole family. Yes. All the people that have won judgments against Whitey in civil cases, like the Rakes family, the people who owned the liquor store, they went into court immediately and got liens placed on the money. So he'll never see that money. I don't know if the Rakes family and all the other families will see it either, but it's got all kinds of liens on it now. Yes.
Did Billy's brother know where Whitey was?
Did Whitey's brother know, you mean? Did
Billy know where his brother was?
I don't think he knew. I don't think he knew for a long time. I don't know. In the beginning, yeah, he probably did know. But, there was in 1996, when everybody, the law enforcement, the papers, everybody thought that Whitey had left, when his alias was discovered. The Bulger family was and their minions were trying to move a bunch of coins out of the country. That because he always wanted to. He'd been planning this thing for at least 20 years to go on the run, and so he had a bunch of coins because you can always get rid of old coins, and they were trying to ship the coins to Europe, and the FBI was tapping the phones, and they knew it, and so they impaneled a grand jury, and some of these people lied, and they came very close to getting Billy Bulger on that. His law partner Tom Finnerty was disbarred in it, and one of the court officers was committed perjury, and then recanted his testimony. It actually went to the whole Supreme Court to try to get. They said that Finnerty couldn't testify against Bulger because Bulger was Finnerty's client, it was, you know, real BS. But the crazy thing about that is, you know, this was like the Herald broke this story like about 5 years ago, and it was a real bear to break the story because they're protecting the feds are protecting all these guys. They say, you know, lawyer A for client 1. You know, we don't have any names. And I'm thinking to myself, if I was in a jam or if Joe Crowley was in a jam, are they going to be identifying us by numbers and letters? No, they're just going to be throwing us out to the wolves, you know? And it was like they're still protecting this guy. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court. He robs me every week. He robs you every week, you know. I mean, this is a guy, you know, we voted back in 2000. We, 60% of the people in Massachusetts, voted to cut our income taxes to 5%, which we were promised it would be cut, you know, once the fiscal emergency of the 1980s ended. And he stopped it from going down. So he held it at instead of going down to 5%, it's only at 5.3%. So if you make 50 grand a year, he's stealing 150 bucks a year from you. I just don't like the guy. I mean, he's just, you know. But that's what I always say. He's never taken his hand out of my pocket or yours. Yes. No, what happened was they tried to, well, the family, you know, tried to keep the money, tried to get the money, but the feds grabbed it, and then I think it finally ran out last year. He took the 20-year plan, and the 20 years ran out last year. The feds ended up with that dough. I don't know what, you know, people always say that, you know, how did they get that? I don't know, how did that work? I don't know how it worked exactly. I think probably what happened was he paid the guy for the part of the ticket, you know, because the problem with these guys, and it applies to politicians too, is that they can always do the old Al Capone on you, do a net worth investigation, you know, and they can just say, well, you have this, you know, you have this house, and you took this vacation, and you have this car, et cetera, and yet you claim an income of $5,000, so obviously you're hiding it. But if you've got 80,000, 90,000, if you've got 90,000 coming in after taxes every year, it's pretty hard to prove anything. That was really what the doctor ordered for him in 1991. But his big mistake though was going to pick it up himself. You know, I mean, they never had pictures of him. You know, nobody, and I mean, everybody, you know, we all knew what he looked like because we were in the area, but you know, no one was going into like, you know, take a picture of him, right? I mean, that would have been very hazardous to one's health. So we just had these old, ancient surveillance photos. But then all of a sudden, when he shows up in Braintree, we all have pictures of him. Yes, sir. Where is he now? Well, he's retired, and he still lives in South Boston. And he wrote a book about Curly last year. And I'll bet he's available, Joe. And he has a place in Naples, Florida, too. It's interesting that he has a place in Naples, Florida, and so does David Bartley, the former House Speaker. You know, that they sort of came up, and they're the same age basically, and they're the same, and they came up together. And Bartley, of course, is now got a. Bartley is trying to struggle by on a pension of a mere $150,000 a year, whereas Bulger's is $200,000. But fortunately, we have casinos being about to be built in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So Bartley has become a lobbyist for one of the casinos. I think the one that wants to, the group that wants to build in Palmer. But Billy's still around. I think it was. I forget what year it was, if it was 2008 or 2004, but he, you know, it's not enough that he's got the $200,000 coming in on the pension and, you know, whatever other money he's got. He also wanted to apply for Social Security. So he waited until the day of the New Hampshire primary because he knew that there was no, that every reporter in the city would be up in New Hampshire. So I mean, again, these guys, they're very crafty and devious. Yes. Yeah, he was in Santa Monica for about for most of the time he was on the lam. When he left in December of '94, and then they were just kind of cruising around for a while, and then he settled in Louisiana for a while, and he was living in this sort of Cajun country, and he was communicating with some of his old buddies from Alcatraz. And then finally around, I think in middle of '96, they went to Teresa Stanley, and she was the first girlfriend, and again, it takes him a year and a half to go to Teresa Stanley, even though she was traveling with him for the first few weeks. She tells him his alias is Thomas Baxter, and ironically had been stopped twice by the cops in 1995 for speeding, and if they'd have known his alias, they would have grabbed him right then. But once the alias was broken, I guess Kevin Weeks, she told Kevin Weeks that she'd given up the alias. Weeks told Bulger, and then he went to Chicago, and he stayed with this guy named Barney Grogan, who was also a bank robber whose brother was a politician in the Chicago Cook County machine. But the thing was, unlike Barney Grogan's real name was O'Brien, and he had to avoid embarrassing his brother, he had changed his name. Whitey, what did he care? He probably figured it was a good career booster for his brother to have the same name as him. But so then they left. That's when they got the new IDs made. They first posed Jackie Bulger as thinking Jackie Bulger, the youngest brother, could pass as Whitey, and Whitey said this isn't good enough, so they got some more fake IDs, and then they flew to New York from Chicago, and then they vanished, and everybody assumed that they had gone to Europe from there, but in fact they went to Santa Monica, and he'd been there for 16 years, and apparently, so a lot of these sightings, at like the they saw him at, one time this guy claimed he saw him at leaving a showing of The Departed, and he jumped on the trolley heading down for Tijuana, and then another time they saw him waiting in a car where outside of a beauty parlor where Catherine Gregg may have been getting her hair done. And, there were several instances like that, and apparently where it appears that they actually he was seen, he was spotted. I'll tell you a weird story. There's this weird bar, not a weird bar, it's just a Boston sports bar right near where he lived in Santa Monica, and he used to go there sometimes, and the sports station in the cluster of stations where I am, they used to get very, very occasionally, maybe like 2 or 3 times over the course of all these years, they'd get a call from this bar. Yeah, Sonny McLean's, that's it. That's the name of the place. They'd get calls from guys in Boston. Hey, I'm out here on vacation. I swear to God, I'm sitting next to Whitey Bulger. Yeah, sure, pal. And how about the guy in Las Vegas? I mean, I think that guy's got a real gripe, a real beef. I mean, the guy that he phoned it in to America's Most Wanted. It's on the log that he had seen the guy on the pier at Santa Monica, and they didn't give him any money. This was months before the woman from Iceland. He got screwed, that guy. Yes. I think he said MCI Norfolk or one of those places. I don't think it's really. It would have saved the taxpayers a lot of money over the last 45 years. Yeah. You know what? I'll check that. I got to make another call to the DOC about some mug shots. But the last I heard, he was still in. I can't. They let. Yeah. I will check that out first thing in the morning, actually. Thanks for that tip. But if you don't see anything, then he's still in. But if you see something, we'll definitely, it'll definitely go into the paper. That's it. That would be, he died a free man. George McLaughlin. This is the guy, this was the last of the McLaughlin brothers, the guys that were in the Irish gang war against Winter Hill. Yes, ma'am. I think the FBI there's two different FBIs. There's the FBI that was compromised and corrupted by Whitey, and that FBI is pretty much gone. They're either dead or they're in jail, like Zip, or they've retired and got immunity deals. And then there's the other FBI that's the current FBI. I don't know what they want. I keep thinking to myself that at the very end, if he's still alive, that at the last moment they'll just make a deal and just he'll plead guilty so that he doesn't have to go back to one of the death penalty states. Obviously, it's too late to execute him in Oklahoma or Florida. It would take, considering how long the appeals process lasts. But I think a lot of people, including the people in Boston, would like to see him tried in a death penalty state, because that would be, that's what he deserves. He deserves to die, in a, on a gurney for what he did. But I don't think I think it was a real feather in the cap for these guys that got him. The new agents, they didn't know anything about him. None of the agents in the Boston office now knew Whitey Bulger. Yes. You mean after he was on the lam? Yeah, no, I was definitely afraid. Yeah, like I said, I used to go home a different way every night, and I did, and I can remember a couple nights when I lived in a different part of Acton, just being, it was the winter, and like the wind would blow, and all of a sudden a tree branch would hit the glass, and I would hit the floor, But the thing is, it's a weird situation because you never choose to get into this kind of situation. It just kind of happens, and once you're in it, in this case, I knew I couldn't go to the cops. It was just, and I couldn't really say anything, because if I said anything, it looks like either I'm just a crazy paranoid coward, or it looks like I'm just. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't really say anything. I had to just write it out. Yes. No, I always get to ask that question, and I think the fact is that somebody had to do a lot of work to put that together, and work and Whitey Bulger are two phrases that don't really go in the same sentence. Whitey's the kind of guy that would have found out that they had done it and then demanded, I want one of the pictures, or I want all of the pictures. But I don't think he was involved in it. I think what happened there was somebody was grabbing those pictures as sort of a bargaining chip to get some charges reduced, and then something else happened. And they didn't need the pictures for that anymore, and the pictures just got stashed somewhere. I think those pictures are coming back. I think those pictures. I made that prediction in my column on New Year's Day. I think those pictures will be back this year. But no, Whitey won't. No, Whitey had nothing to do with the Isabella Stewart Gardner pictures. I'm positive of that. It's just, again, it's just not his style. It's, somebody, it would have taken some time and effort to figure out what the routine of the guards was, and, get some Boston police uniforms and buy some ropes to tie everybody's hands. He didn't want to do that. He just wants to pull out his knife and, and jab it into the wall and say, give me one of those pictures. I just don't think I don't think he did it. It's just not his style. He stopped robbing banks. I mean, he was a bank robber, and I think he realized pretty quickly that even back in the 50s, robbing banks was not a robbing any kind of robbery is not a good long-term career. Being a stick-up guy, you saw that on Friday, obviously, that the more evidence of that. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Good. Right. Right. Yeah. I don't know. I guess that's the $64 question. How much we're going to find out. I mean, I would settle just learning where the safe deposit boxes are, and and grabbing the money, and preventing his family from getting the money. But yeah, no, I know a lot of people thought that, but I just. I don't think they're going to get anything. I don't know how much there is to get out of him other than where the money is. And a lot of people think that he's had all this time over the years, and that if there were safe, and there probably were, let's just say there were safe deposit boxes, but they're all cleaned out now. That he's had time enough to give the Well, most of them are dead. Like the guy O'Callahan, O'Callahan was the guy who supposedly tipped off Zip to the indictment. He's dead. Rico's dead. Connolly's in prison. Morris has cut a deal. A lot of the Boston cops are dead. O'Sullivan, the head of the organized crime strike force, he's dead. Condon, who was Rico's partner, he's dead. I mean, most of these guys are gone. And again, there's no possible way that they could ever execute Whitey. I mean, when you figure, even in states like Texas, like Oklahoma and Florida, where he's charged with capital murder. I mean, it would take he's not going to live to be 100. Stevie Fleming might live to be 100, by the way. His father, I think, lived to be 100. So but he's already cut his deal. He's in solitary confinement in Otisville. I don't think we're ever going to get any satisfaction that way. It's just one of these things. In many ways, crime does pay. Thanks for coming out, though. I really appreciate it.